Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is interesting to note in the Senate Judiciary Committee that in the last 3 weeks, this is the second time we have entertained a nominee for a circuit court position who has spent so much of his life criticizing the Affordable Care Act. At a moment in time when we are facing a national health emergency where we have lost almost 100,000 Americans who have died because of the coronavirus, where another 1.5 million have been infected, where we have the largest incidence of this viral disease of any nation on earth, that the Republicans would bring to us 2 nominees for the second highest level of federal courts in our land who have such contempt for the Affordable Care Act, which was passed in an effort to give Americans peace of mind to know that they had coverage of health insurance. Hard as it may be for some to believe, there are people who feel vulnerable at this moment in their lives, not just because of the virus, but because of the expense associated with medical care and hospital care. And so, Judge Wilson, my question to you is very simple. You have tweeted over 30 times your contempt for the Affordable Care Act. You have said it in so many different ways. You have characterized the former President of the United States in the most negative terms over his propagating and championing that cause. In light of all the Americans who've died because of the coronavirus, in light of our national health emergency, do you have at least a moment of pause in your efforts to stop the extension of health insurance to so many Americans?
Well, Senator, first, I'd reiterate my view that I held as a legislator and even as a private citizen about the importance of access to health care. And I think during the time the Affordable Care Act was being debated and being litigated both in the court of public opinion as well as in the courts, I think people of good faith, people of reasonable minds could disagree about aspects of the Affordable Care Act or about whether the Affordable Care Act was the right policy solution.
I'm asking you if at one moment, in light of all that we've been through over the last several months, you didn't stop and say, you know, I may not have liked Obama, and I may not like Democrats, and I may not like the way the Affordable Care Act passed, but I get it when so many Americans feel so vulnerable at this moment in their lives. I understand why we need a safety net so that people have the peace of mind that they have access to decent care. I get it as I see people wearing masks in Senate hearings. I understand what was behind that Affordable Care Act and why many of us think it's the most important vote we ever cast. Is there just one moment maybe when that happened to you?
Well, Senator, during my times of public service before becoming a judge, I feel like I always got the importance of health care. I think if you examined my record in the legislature, even when I was running for the legislature, I talked about how important health care was for not only patients who need access to health care, but also providers, and as an economic driver in Mississippi. So there were a number of measures that I supported while serving in the legislature that I think would bear that out. And certainly, again, Senator, I would underscore—
Judge, you want to be a federal judge. As a federal judge, what happened in your legislature may have some importance. What has critical importance, as Senator Feinstein has said, is this piece of federal legislation. And I find it ironic that in the midst of this public health crisis, the Republicans have brought us 2 nominees for the second highest level of federal courts in a matter of 3 weeks who have such disdain for the Affordable Care Act, which provides protection to millions of Americans. Now I want to ask you a question about something that's a little more personal. I decided to take a subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee on the road to Florida and Ohio in the year 2012. The question was on the suppression of the right to vote. These states, Ohio and Florida, had passed legislation that limited opportunities to vote. And so our subcommittee went to each of the states and called election officials of both political parties and put them under oath and asked them a very simple question. What is the incidence of voter fraud in Florida and Ohio that you believe led the legislature to restrict the access to vote, to limit opportunities to vote, to require identification? Tell me of the cases of fraud that led to this. And in both states, in both instances, there were none. None. And yet, when it came time for you to take a look at my effort and to grade it, you called it a show trial. But there was no substance to it, I guess. Is that what that means? So would you like to comment today about why calling election officials under oath and asking them the incidence of voter fraud was some kind of a show trial?
Senator, respectfully, as a sitting judge, I can't comment because of the canons and the code of conduct on political issues.
Go ahead. Let's hear it all.
Well, I can't comment on political issues or issues related to policy. I can say, Senator, that when I wrote those columns, again, I wasn't a judge, and I was active in politics and campaigns.
Here's what we're faced with. When people have been as outspoken as you have been on your political views, we have two possibilities. A deathbed conversion, that you're going to go to the federal bench and be a new person. Thank goodness you haven't said that. Or that you're going to be a robot judge. I do what I'm told. There's really no discretion here. Whether I'm a conservative or liberal is immaterial to how I'll rule as a judge. I don't believe it. Never have, never will. Your life experience, your political views are going to be part of your decision making. And we ought to just acknowledge it, and I wish you could be more candid in admitting it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.